Okay, in this module, we're going to look at collective problem solving. And to get into the subject, I want us to think way back to a time before problems. So, what you see here is an image of what we think the living world may have looked like around 600 million years ago. We call the Ediacaran period. We had animals, multicellular life forms that could reproduce sexually and sometimes even move around a little bit. But most of life in this time period was stationary, was stuck in one place or floating with the tides, feeding on the ocean floor, getting their nutrients through their skin. And what you didn't have was any kind of hunting or predator or prey. And this was a time when you could say that there were really no problems as such. If you were an animal, you lived your life, you didn't have a lot of choices to make. Things were pretty simple. But then, around 500 million years ago, the amount of oxygen increased dramatically in the atmosphere. And this led to some animals growing bigger, developing muscles, being able to move, and being able to find other animals to eat. And once some predators evolved, an evolutionary arms race began. And in what we call the Cambrian period, there was an explosion of new life forms that were moving and hunting and escaping and hiding. And this is where you could say problems begin. Problems begin with the evolution of the nervous system. What does a nervous system allow us to do? It allows us to sense our environment, to make some kind of decision. We put decide in quotes because in the case of the most simple animals, these decisions were relatively automatic. Go here and not there. Move or stay still. And then the nervous system would coordinate that response, that motor response. So sensing, deciding or interpreting, and reacting. And when there was a desired state, like wanting to eat or get food or not be eaten, and an undesired state, hunger or the chance of being eaten, and some kind of obstacle, the presence of a predator or the distance to food, then you have a problem. And this is basically a definition of what a problem is. It's something that we desire, something that we need or want, a situation where we don't have that thing, an undesired state, and some kind of obstacle in between that we need to remove. Closer to our time, animals like ants evolved to work together. And ants, as we've seen, are a highly social species that solve these kind of problems about how to find food, how to avoid being eaten, by coordinating their actions together with their nervous systems. They can communicate with each other and take collective action. But their nervous systems are much simpler than ours, more complex than a jellyfish, but more simple than ours. Then, closer to our time, around 50, 90 million years ago, we have mammals and ultimately primates with more complex brains that allow social behaviors, forming friendships, alliances, hierarchies of power, making decisions for others, can understand object categories. That over there is a kind of rock where there are ants that are behind it, and those are we can eat by using this stick. Can make causal inferences, like in cases where the rock is turned over, the ants are probably going to hide. But if we put the rock back, maybe they'll come out, right? This is the kinds of inferences that mammals were able to make. And then the more advanced mammals reading each other's intentions, seeing if another creature is a threat or potentially an ally. And some limited forms of collaboration, role differentiation. You do this, and I come along. But not really the kinds yet that are special to human beings. More like group kind of hunting, but then the winner takes all the meat for himself. What makes us different from all these other living creatures is our ability and our special ability to solve problems together. Mike Tomasello puts it this way: what other animals do not possess is human-like skills of shared intentionality, such as the ability to participate in the thinking of others through joint attention, conventional communication, and pedagogy. Conventional communication is we use the same words, we mean the same thing. Pedagogy, we can teach each other how to do things through our language. And this is something special to human beings. We love being around each other, this hypersociality. We really enjoy each other's presence in a way that many other animals are kind of indifferent to each other's presence. We can create a shared project. Hey, let's build this house together, which other animals don't seem to do. We can create abstract concepts like a roof, a door. Here's how you make a door. Here's how you make a roof. We can transmit past learnings. Here's how my father taught me how to make a roof. First you put the sticks on one side and then you add the straw, and this is how you make a roof. And then we can also finally make arguments in favor of one way of doing something or another way of doing something. Again, this is what makes us special vis-a-vis other animals. And we've seen two different kinds of collective intelligence that humans are capable of. Synchronous collective intelligence, that is teaming up at one time to find a resource or do a project, build a house, escape a threat. And cumulative collective intelligence, transmitting bodies of knowledge over time from one generation to another and making improvements. In each of these cases, we benefit from the efforts and ideas and accumulated knowledge of many, many other people for ourselves to survive. And as we've also seen, one benefit of collective problem solving, as opposed to just solving problems on our own, is that each of us have blind spots. This is like the famous story of the 6 blind men who discover this strange creature. And one of them is touching one side and says, oh, this is a sharp thing. It must be a spear. Another one takes this big floppy thing and says, oh, it's a fan. Another one sees a big trunk and says it's a tree. Well, what they don't know is that they're each holding part of an elephant. And it takes combining different perspectives, especially in a complex problem, in order to understand the problem and therefore find a solution. But we do have a special curse, which is we love our tools, even when they're not always useful. We love the tools in our pockets, we love the tools in our houses, and so often we jump to use the tool before we really understand the problem that we're dealing with. Oh, there's a problem, you say? Well, let's use some big data, or let's use blockchain, or let's use Six Sigma, or let's use generative AI. And the latest, most interesting tool that we know is often the tool that we reach for first. And a way of expressing this tendency is a famous phrase, when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So this is something we have to be careful of, is jumping too fast to a solution because it involves using a tool that we like or are fascinated by or we think others are using. So let's think about modern ways of solving problems, the kinds of systems that have arisen in the last few decades. So let's ask this question. We all like candies, like chocolate-covered cherries. How would you get the cherry inside the chocolate? Well, you might think, okay, well, you have to heat the cherry, turn it into a cordial, like a little liqueur, and then inject it into the chocolate. But the problem is, then it's too hot and the chocolate melts. So how do you solve it? Well, the way that they actually do it is inversely. Freeze the cordial, then dip it in liquid chocolate. So it shows how sometimes to solve a problem, we need to think about it from the other way. This is an example famously used by Genrikh Altshuler, who was was an inventor and author in the Soviet Union, who was one of the first to create a universal theory of problem solving. His theory he called TREES, the theory of inventive problem solving. He worked in the Soviet government and he studied 100,000 or more applications for patents. And each of these patents, brevets, were attempts to solve a problem using a new invention or method. And by studying all the patterns of these inventions or these proposed inventions, he had an insight, which is that the vast majority of problems that require some kind of new solution typically reflect the need to overcome some kind of dilemma or trade-off between two contradictory elements. For example, we need some kind of object that's stable, but that doesn't use too much energy. Or it has to go fast, but it also needs to be reliable. And he argued, his central thesis was that if you understood the basic patterns in these trade-offs or dilemmas, you'll see that there's a finite amount of problem-solving strategies that you can use. He says problem solving is not innate. It can and should be taught. So this is an excerpt from his 40 principles of invention. This is the trees problem-solving method that he invented in the 1950s. And you see that problems come in patterns, and these patterns involve these different trade-offs of two different factors. And each of these 40 principles, which you see about a dozen here, are ways of are common strategies for solving these problems. And if you want to learn more about this, you can check out the website. People are still developing Altshuler's method. Another pioneer in thinking about problem solving was Colonel John Boyd. He was a pilot, an American pilot who flew 22 missions during the Korean War, and who thought very carefully about the strategy and tactics of war and the design of aircraft. His theory of energy maneuverability became a world standard in the design of fighter aircraft. John Boyd famously said, "In war, time is the dominant parameter. The key to victory is the ability to create situations in which you can make appropriate decisions more quickly than your opponent." And what he figured out, or what he proposed, is that the way of making fast decisions in wartime involves going through these same 4 steps: observing, orienting, deciding, and acting. Let's say you're parachuting from a plane and you land in a forest. You need to first observe. Are you hurt? Where are you? Are you in an uninhabited or inhabited area? You orient, right? Which is, okay, I see a village. Do I go to it or not? Is it likely to be friendly or not? Oh, I see that there's, the colors of an allied tribe. Then I decide, okay, I'm going to go to this village because I think they'll help me, and act, right? And the ability to react to novel situations, especially in a critical moment, is the ability to do each of these steps reliably and quickly. Observe, orient, decide, act, and then he later added the final step, which is over time you have to learn from the results of the action. So he calls this the UDA or UDAL loop. And as we see, this is very similar, actually, to what the earliest life forms with nervous systems had to do. The nervous system involves observing, using that information in a very simple way to decide upon an action and to act. And as life becomes more complex, we become capable of more interesting forms of action and more interesting forms of learning. So John Boyd's OODA loop is something that you'll encounter often among those who think about systems for solving problems. We've also seen the very special category of complex problems called wicked problems, where needs can be incomplete, contradictory, or changing over time, where people might be disagreeing about the objectives or with conflicts of interest, and where there's not one solution for all time, but perhaps better strategies or less favorable strategies. The problem, the solution, and the method might all be unknown, and therefore you need a system for collective learning and learning over time. Because a wicked problem requires us to understand many diverse perspectives, we need to build a diverse coalition of actors. The quality of the problem, the fact that it's fast-moving and changes over time, means we need a system for feedback on the problem. And because the expertise that exists today may not be sufficient, we need to identify, develop new skills. And finally, because the problem is evolving in response to our actions, this system we create for problem solving needs to include rituals to learn over time. So this is the most complex form of problem solving that we know of, that requires us to think differently and in this collaborative way, which is why we need the intelligence of the group. So over the last 50 or 60 years, you've seen especially consulting companies propose different forms of different theories and methods of problem solving, like Lean Six Sigma, CPS, creative problem solving, and the like. And all of these have different benefits and drawbacks and different forms of proof, but they tend to rely on this same kind of cycle of defining, deconstructing, generating solutions, making decisions, and taking actions, and finally learning from those actions. But they describe a similar problem-solving cycle, just using slightly different terminology. One very novel contribution to the field of problem solving is thinking about the levels of problem solving on a team or organization. So Chris Argyris here, a very famous a Harvard professor of organizational learning, proposed that most companies, what people do all day is single loop learning, improving the system as it exists. So tactical problem solving within the bounds of a project, within the given resources that we have. If you're running a restaurant, that would be serving your clients, responding to their needs all day long in the restaurant. That's single loop learning, dealing with broken plates and food that has gone bad and this kind of thing. Double loop learning, which he says most organizations do informally and periodically, is more than just fixing a tactical problem. It's a style of learning that questions the underlying assumptions and says, oh, maybe we didn't order the right food, or maybe we didn't structure our human resources system in the right way. So this creates a second order thinking that is often not as well structured. And finally, there's a third loop, which he says is rarely done by any organization, which is what is to questioning the overall rationale, the raison d'être, the context, the orientation. What does our restaurant exist for? Maybe we should be a cooking school instead, or become a hotel. And this is the kind of a third loop learning, the highest level of collective thinking that most organizations are not capable of, or don't do in any kind of regular way. And he says that the greatest leverage that you can get, the greatest leverage on your performance, is by systematizing, formalizing the double and triple loops within your learning process. Loop 1, did we do it right? Loop 2, are we doing the right thing? Loop 3, how do we even decide what is right? So it's the highest level of questioning our overall strategy. Another great step forward in complex problem solving was the rise of systems thinking in the 1980s and 1990s. We see here two great pioneers in the use of systems thinking in organizations, Peter Senge from MIT and Professor Ron Heifetz of Harvard. And in later modules, we're going to be exploring their techniques of mapping systems. And the last thing I'm going to add in this is the rise of another set of techniques for problem solving, which relies on taking textual knowledge and making it visual. And I think this could even be called the secret weapon of collective problem solving. Professor Martin Epler, University of St. Gallen, has done several studies of the effect of visualization on our ability to remember and solve problems in teams. And he argues that a majority of our brain activity deals with processing and interpreting visual images. And we have very strong abilities to identify patterns visually, more so than oral information or textual information. Similarly, we can remember visual information better in many cases than text alone. And so that if you're thinking about how a team becomes smarter, there are some studies that have shown that acquiring knowledge through a combination of text, sound, and image may be more effective than just through text alone. And Epler proposes three different kinds of knowledge visualization that we can each use to help our collective problem solving. Heuristic sketches, which are simple symbols for written knowledge or spoken knowledge, turning them into images like this globe or pie chart or this circle of little drawn people, drawn clock to represent time. And each of these little sketches is a heuristic, meaning it helps us, it's a little shortcut to an idea. So each of these little sketches make information that is part of a discussion easier, quicker to understand, and easier to remember. Second category are conceptual diagrams. This could be like a systems map that shows how different elements in a conversation or in a discussion relate to each other and can present complex relationships in a very concise way. And because it synthesizes this complex information in the form of an image, you might be able to see new insights. And in our module on systems mapping, we're going to see how creating a map, a visual representation of a system can help us identify where to act on the system and how we can create leverage on the system. So we have heuristic sketches, conceptual diagrams, and visual metaphors, like this metaphor of a pathway. This is from a workshop involving justice, the justice system for young people in a Native American tribe in the U.S. It's from a facilitator in the U.S. And you see on this path these different steps, each of which has a heuristic sketch. And this path here represents a story about how the justice system for people of the Cree Nation was created, what are the different services that have been created over time, and each of the steps in the story has a little image associated with it. And so the metaphor of this path helps us think through the steps of the story in a way that helps us remember all of these different elements of the justice system. So the path is one visual metaphor. Aristotle famously said, what are metaphors useful for? Well, they help us think. They're a tool of cognition. And you can see how taking a complex list of justice entities and turning it into a path helps us remember and think about the information. Another visual metaphor here is the iceberg, which helps us think about explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge, things that we can see, things that are invisible. Metaphors like global warming as an ice cream cone, which again we take something that's really hard and huge and hard to see and make it human level, right? The visual metaphor makes it something that we can interact with. We understand that an ice cream cone represents something that's precious, we want to enjoy, and that if we don't act, if we heat it up, it can become impossible to enjoy. Or the metaphor of a bridge, letting go of the past, moving through a transition over a risky chasm into a new beginning. And so this bridge becomes a metaphor of a team needing to pass through a difficult period. Each of these visual metaphors help tell a story that people can add new ideas to and can help potentially identify new forms of solution. So finally, what are the benefits of visualizing problems in groups? Well, the first is that if you just have text or just have a spoken discussion, we get quickly overloaded with information. So putting things together in image makes it easier to capture all of the elements of the problem in a concise way. Second is that when you're having a discussion, sometimes you get anchored towards one specific part of the problem and you don't get to all the other parts of the problem. Whereas if you visualize it, you can have a better chance, if you choose the right image, of touching all the parts of the problem. Text, as we've seen, can be harder to remember because text has evolved relatively as a tool that's evolved relatively recently in human history. Whereas images, our ability to recall visual information is very, very, very old, hundreds of thousands of years old. And so it's part of our mental processing that makes remembering information easier. So those are the cognitive benefits. But there are also what we can think of as social or emotional benefits of visualizing knowledge. Divergent views and assumptions that can be seen as conflictual when we are talking at each other in a room. If you can find an image that brings these different views together, it can integrate, clarify, and maybe remove the potential for conflict within the group. When you're talking through a problem, maybe different people are focused on different things. Whereas if you have a common image or a metaphor, this can help focus the group's attention and therefore coordinate a possible solution. Finally, thinking about a problem through the exchange of sequential emails or talking around a group. While one person is talking, the others are passive. Whereas creating an image has the potential for being more interactive. And by more people interacting with an image, picking up the pen, adding something, or drawing themselves, this can build some energy and therefore an emotional connection within the group. So these are some of the what science tells us about the different ways to think about complex problem solving, including the importance of visualizing knowledge. And so we're going to see in the methods of problem solving we study at the school, methods of problem discovery and definition, all of which use the power of knowledge visualization in the group, affinity mapping, problem definition canvas, and the persona method from human-centered design, and two methods of problem deconstruction, the 5 Why method and what we call the advanced Ishikawa, which again both use visually structured information to help use the intelligence of the group to solve a complex problem. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to seeing you soon.